This week's episode was brought to you by DP and Luke. Thank you, DP and Luke. It's with the generous support of listeners like you that our psychic, battle-hardened warriors of philosophy keep their blades and eyes sharp for the cosmic battle of meaning and purpose upon the lonely heights of the occult podcasting abyss, where we throw back into the heightless darkness the ferocious lurker of the deep, who murmurs idiotically and it's writhing about the circumference of the world. If you'd like to help us protect the gateway at the mouth of infinity, or just hear the second half of this episode, then please visit www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit, where your monthly contribution of just $5 will not only earn you unlimited special access to our voluminous archive of top secret episodes overflowing with information too classified for normal ears. Oh no, I'll even send you at no additional cost a 5x5 high quality vinyl sticker of our Big Money Baphomet cover art to show your clandestine affiliation to our network of occult spies, which, if that were not all, you'll be given the access to communicate with our secret network of said agents in the field, which if our Patreon does not submit them to you automatically, which it does in most cases unless our etheric spectrometer security grid detects unauthorized forms of sandwich meat, then I'll send you one personally. If you'd like to aid us in our recruitment efforts, please share this episode with a friend and make sure to tell them they're joining a cult as soon as they listen even once. We have found that through this method of viral indoctrination that we are approaching 100 million listeners, but most of them are far underground, and we're not sure what that means. In this week's episode, Heka Astra brings us full circle to conclude this 3-part series concerning the philosophy and occult implications found within Rudolph Steiner's The Philosophy of Freedom. On the free side of the tape, we discuss the philosophy of monism and just how many concepts fit neatly inside, and whether or not the world or life itself has purpose. In the extended show, we wrap up all the loose ends and conclude with a rousing discussion on Steiner's ideas about morality, the imagination, the value of life itself, individuality, the genius, racial qualities. Warning, it gets controversial. And answers, finally, once and for all, if we are truly free or not. Thank you, and enjoy the show.
Apparently, Russian freedom is no different than U.S. freedom. The American says, I could go right now in front of the White House and hold a protest against the President of the United States, and nothing would happen to me. And the Russian responds saying, my friend, it is the same in Russia. The Red Square is open to all those who wish to protest against the President of the United States.
What else you got?
Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Who's there?
Not freedom, because freedom rings.
Better not have a ring doorbell with the surveillance of the state.
We're not sponsored, but we could be.
Is that the Patriot Act?
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if those doorbells were hooked up to that shit.
Just ring the doorbell and shirt off pops out of the trash can with an MP5 and a SWAT team.
How many philosophers does it take to change a light bulb?
Oh boy, how many?
How many?
It depends on how you define change.
All right, then. How many Marxists does it take to change a light bulb?
How many?
None. The light bulb contains the seed of its own revolution.
Okay.
Two behaviorists have sex. One turns to the other and says, that was good for you. How was it for me? Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Whole Rabbit, where we don't just throw you down a lexicological rabbit hole of abyssal nothingness from which we derive a slew of banal, meaningless platitudes with words requiring a safety license to pronounce correctly and cause normal trains of thought to derail into hideous explosions of ontological confusion. Nay, we also approach with surgical levels of precision the practical issue of whether or not we are possessed of free will, what freedom entails, and how we can exercise this inherently moral faculty in a way that gives us power, pleasure, and purpose, liberated from the narrow confines of both instinct and compulsion. Because this week, we're discussing the penultimate capstone in part 3 of covering Rudolph Steiner's The Philosophy of Freedom. I'm your host, Luke Madrid, also known as Hack Rabbit. I'm joined this week by the Matryoshka dog within a dog within a dog within a dog, Mari-sama.
It's dogs all the way down until there's gods all the way down.
And the succotash flavored Rapidash, Heka Astra.
Hello. It's the thrilling conclusion to the series of freedom.
Which Heka Astra wrote, by the way.
Thank you, Heka.
Yay.
You know, it's almost like freedom is an important topic or something. It's like something people should think about and know about and maybe even debate each other about. But you just don't see that anymore. It's all about how do we be safe? How do we include everyone? You know, why is the earth flat? These are the questions we ask these days. But really, this is the most important thing we could talk about on the whole show.
I'm pretty passionate about sharing freedom.
Yeah, I would definitely take freedom over safety. Let's just put it that way. Give me liberty or give me death.
Amen.
You tell it like it is.
Yeah, I mean, aside from food, shelter, and I think freedom is the next important thing on the list.
All you really need is a cave and some meat and some fire and maybe a fidget spinner. That's really why Homo sapiens evolved, is because the aliens came by and dropped off fidget spinners. And that's why we landed on the moon. We'll talk about that next time. In this week's episode, we culminate with the big ideas that Steiner has been building up to in the first two parts, so we could arrive at a crystal clear understanding of why, on a fundamental and conceptual level, we are truly free. In the previous parts, we discussed a number of interesting ways to look at reality, which in part laid the foundation for our discussion, including what naive realism is,
What you see is what you get.
transcendental idealism,
It's all in your head.
how intuition factors into thinking, the limits of human knowledge itself, the concept of human individuality, having an ego, all that good stuff, what a concept even is, and of course, what its seed, the percept, is. I mentioned this last because now I get to yell at my co-host that, yes, indeed, I was correct in saying initially that percepts include feelings, because basically, percepts are anything that appear to your awareness, which we then may direct our thoughts at or derive our concepts from, etc.
I didn't necessarily want to naysay the entire thing that you were saying. I think you were just jumping ahead, like you were doing like grade 8 homework in grade 4. So feelings and even thoughts can be percepts if you perceive them. It just wasn't specifically what he was talking about in that chapter, but it's totally relevant. It's a valid point, and it will be relevant also throughout this episode. Welcome to grade 8. Luke just skips grades. That's all.
He's that smart, right?
He is.
Well, don't be so nice about it. Yeah, basically a percept is anything that you're like experiencing, whether you're imagining it or looking at it or slapping yourself.
Yeah, like when you have a thought and you're perceiving that you're having a thought, your thought is then a percept. Same thing about feelings.
Okay, so now that I've had my I told you so moment, we can finally disembark on our journey into the final leg, which also happens to be a leg of monism. And monism will be the solution that Steiner proposes to many of the problems we've discussed thus far. So to crack that nut open, Steiner begins by musing about the shortcomings of naive realism, what you see is what you get, its cousin, metaphysical realism, it's real somewhere, but not here, and the devil, dualism, the unreal is a reflection of the real somewhere else, positing that each comes to its own limiting and unsatisfying conclusions, especially in regards to the moral chains one invariably finds themselves in. Kind of a big deal. For starters, Steiner says the naive man, the one who limits reality to what they can sense and taste and touch, the basis of that person's morality or sense of God itself will necessarily be rooted in ideas that are perceptible to his senses, like in one way or the other.
Quote, he requires someone or something to impart the basis for his action to him in a way that his senses can understand. He is ready to allow this basis for action to be dictated to him as commandments by any man whom he considers wiser or more powerful than himself, or whom he acknowledges for some other reason to be a power over him. The man who awakens at last to the conviction that basically these powers are human beings as weak as himself, seeks guidance from a higher power, a divine being, whom he endows, however, with sense-perceptible features. He conceives this being as communicating to him the conceptual content of his moral life, again in a perceptible way, whether it be, for example, that God appears in the burning bush, or that he moves about among men in manifest human shape, and that their ears can hear him telling them what to do and what not to do, unquote. Yeah, like, I used to be a big proponent of separation of church and state and stuff, but there's some aspects of governance and men telling other men, humans telling other humans what to do in a power hierarchy that it requires a higher power to be present. for that to even work.
Well, Steiner gets into this. He basically says before you're able to decide for yourself, you need examples. But what I find most pertinent about this section is that he points out that naive realists basically need something that's tied to the senses. And this basically shakes out to where, have you ever met someone who, in terms of their religion, especially in terms of Jesus Christ, the important thing about Jesus Christ is not his teachings, it's that he rose from the dead. You know what I mean? Like, that's, I think what he's getting at here is that, I think he even mentions it like in that way. And so for the people who really want to dig into that issue, because it's bothered me for years, Steiner explains it pretty well in this section. Now, for those who resist the idea that their moral standards come from an external God or even other people, finding the basis of their morality in their own inward conscience,
Let your conscience be your guide.
Steiner argues that this transcends purely naive realism by transforming moral standards into their own independently existing entities like we might expect in metaphysical realism, which in turn always seeks the roots of its morality in the non-human realm. You know, we have to be good because Netzach says so, basically. You know, like, I've been to the edge of the cave, and when I met God, he told me not to eat beans. And so in that arrangement, Steiner argues that because human agency has been removed as the basis of one's morality, specifically the part where you do your own thinking, one's moral behavior is invariably chained either by the domain of cold mechanical law or the distant dictates of an ex-cathedra morality imposed on us by basically what can be described as little else than a spiritual entity, which Steiner amounts to basically being little more than dualism. Like, you have to come to your own conclusion. Like, any appeal to an external reason why you're doing something, it doesn't work for Steiner. You're not free in that case.
This also reminds me a bit of the atheism episode that we did before, and Steiner will point out this connects with our intuition. Without intuitively knowing morality personally, people seek it out, or they're raised in a kind of environment where there is someone or even a group of people that are deemed to hold more authority or wisdom on it. So think of a child that does not yet know right from wrong and must learn through experience. And this is where churches or even governments step in to dictate what exactly morality entails. Both of these options still habitually place the authority of morality as being above the individual. So for anyone that doesn't connect to those proposed ideas on a personal level, especially through experience, the natural reaction to it is to reject it and consequently the embrace of the opposite ideological stance. So if you were raised Catholic, you might become an atheist. If it's communism, you might double down on democracy. With monism, you might embrace dualism. This might even be further solidified by the rejection of one authority and the seeking out of the opposing ideology's authority. So maybe no longer seeking a priest as the authority, but an atheist author instead. For me, when Steiner points this out, he's implying that the authority doesn't lie in an external authority, but rather within yourself, and that this is both a personal and universal matter, regardless of monistic or dualistic perspectives. In fact, this personal relationship of morality, it harmonizes the two. The common thread that we see in atheism seems to fit in well as one possible route for what Steiner says here, as just one method of naive realism's expression of morality.
Quote, the highest stage of development of naive realism in the sphere of morality is that where the moral commandment or moral idea is separated from every being other than oneself and is thought of, hypothetically, as being an absolute power in one's own inner life. What man first took to be the external voice of God, he now takes as an independent power within him, and speaks of this inner voice in such a way as to identify it with conscience, unquote. I love this because it's just pointing out that the as above, so below, that God is perceived as being external and all-powerful and even above this dimension of material reality, but at the same time, that same spirit source energy exists within you. And so there's a way to like, no, but really, like, that's what your conscience is supposed to be. It's like a flicker of that spirit inside of you that you're supposed to use as a guiding light.
I'm sorry, I wasn't laughing at what you were saying. I was just thinking about how, you know, when the external voice of God becomes the internal voice of God, sometimes it manifests as that whole I am I.
Oh yeah.
You know, where it's like all of a sudden nothing else exists just nothing else matters. You are the ultimate power. And then where is it as far as it relates to your morality and your conscience, really?
I don't agree with everything they say, but I must speak up for the atheist in the back, because what Steiner is describing is very similar to what the top minds in atheism plead against religion. They say, I don't need your book to act morally. I don't need a God to not take child wives, you know? I have my own apparatus of thought and awareness and self-reflection and conscience. And so I can come to my own moral conclusions. And Steiner would say, good, you should.
Yes, I would say, yes, they're right. But does that also in turn make them the authority on morality?
No, not for me. I mean, I think they've come, like, I think just to play devil's advocate, I'm not an atheist, but I think how they describe morality, I think Steiner's got them covered. And I think I was fascinated to learn that personally.
I heard a joke recently. I'm probably going to butcher it tremendously, but in a nutshell, it's actually a Jewish allegory. Two men go to a rabbi and they say, because they're debating, they have a problem and they want the rabbi to settle it. The first man says his part of the story and the rabbi says, you're right. And the second guy goes, well, hold on a second, and then tells his side of the story. And the rabbi says, you're right. And then a third person who's overlooking it goes to the rabbi and says, you just said that they're both right, but they couldn't possibly be both right. Wouldn't that be wrong? And the rabbi says, you're right.
Who is this rabbi? Robert Anton Wilson?
The problem that I have, though, with the atheist take on it is that it very easily slips into this my perceived morality versus yours. So there is no like absolute source for the morality. So in a way that people's opinions could sway like how they process it or something. I have a hard time explaining it, but there's a possibility of like conflicting ideas coming about in that way.
Okay, I'm gonna do my best to say what Steiner might say in reply. He might say, that's fair, but to a certain extent, our thoughts are not entirely subjective. They're based on the percepts and the concepts we build around them. And culturally, we share some of these things in common. They're objective to a certain degree. And so if we talk things out enough and we use the apparatus of our brain enough, we can probably agree upon a basic moral framework without needing the Bible, basically.
Yeah, and that's also essentially what we're unpacking here. It's like we're going to get further into detail with this process specifically. So this avenue of morality is part of what necessitates the establishment of ethics committees, for example, in governments of countries that have diversified beliefs of the citizens. You can take Western societies, for example, where we have so many diverse beliefs from Catholics to atheists. It also reminds me a bit of how atheistic religions such as LaVeyan Satanism and some forms of Luciferianism approach the topic of morality, as you brought up before, because it's not as though they don't have a moral code that they come to know on a personal level.
Yeah, I know, but I feel like people tend to disagree more than they agree on such things.
Right. So isn't it funny that we have to have ethics codes and laws to mitigate that?
Yeah, I guess that's what the law is for, but...
And constitutional right.
I honestly wouldn't have a podcast about stuff like this if I didn't believe that we had the ability to talk these things out. So I guess on some level, I do agree with Steiner that our own thoughts about things such as morality are not entirely subjective if we do our thinking, basically. And it is possible for us to be a more happy, productive, and moral society if we talk things out. In theory, we could all enjoy it more too. But I'm a dreamer.
No, Luke, you're in grade 12 now. You're jumping to the end of the podcast.
I'm sorry.
I mean, Ed, I have some examples of how I think that would clash, but I mean, the law, it makes sense that we have laws like in, ethics committees, because a lot of people don't agree on what's moral and what's just and right. And we would be in a really bad situation if certain groups got to, enact their morals on society.
It's unfortunately the biggest fault of anarchism.
You know what? We will talk about this later because it takes a certain amount of leveling up before you can make use of that faculty. So you cannot just suspend the law entirely.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because Anarchy sounds good on paper, but it's not. It's no bueno. Like, we all have to be basically spiritual beings at that point for that to work.
All right, so what about moral order when you've got this world and the great beyond, i.e., dualism?
Steiner says, quote, "The moral world appears to the dualist as the perceptible reflection of a higher order standing behind it. Earthly morality is the manifestation of the extra-human world order. It is not man that matters in this moral order, but the being itself, that is, the extra-human entity. Man shall do as this being wills." Edward von Hartmann, who imagines this being itself as a godhead whose very existence is a life of suffering, believes that this divine being has created the world in order to thereby gain release from his infinite suffering. Hence, this philosopher regards the evolution of humanity as a process which is there for the redemption of God, unquote.
Okay, before attacking that very juicy bit, let's say I was possessed of the intelligence to have read Steiner in the early parts of my initiation. I sure wish I had, because I got caught in this dualistic trap where I was like, I have to infer or figure out what is on the other side or what the ultimate reality is. Otherwise, there's no way for me to figure out what to do here. And I would get, obsessive. That's how I got so familiar with so many different occult avenues of knowledge, was because I was stuck in dualism here. Because it's like, if I don't know the answers there, I can't know the answers here. But he's like, that's a way to get stuck in every which sort of way. And it's true. He's going to give us an alternative to that. That being said, this model that he brings up from von Hartmann is awesome. It reminds me of like something out of anime like Evangelion. So like God is in this state of like permanent, unending, infinite suffering, and only by externalizing itself into human material existence do we have the ability to use our thinking and reflective faculties to act as moral beings and redeem God. Whoa. But the problem is, that's just, as cool as that sounds, it would make us a slave to the absolute. And no matter which way you slice it, you say that's what you end up getting. That being said, I wish Christianity had landed on that idea and like stuck with it, because that's really psychedelic and cool and wicked. And I think a good motivator for making people act moral, but hey.
Steiner even points out that one version of this ideology depicts humans as individuated pieces of God that manifest as God's methodology of self-redemption. In this scenario, the authority of morality is still externalized and impressed as an obligation, regardless of our intuitive connection.
I still think it's pretty baller, though. I think I like it because it accepts the noble truth that life is suffering from Buddhism, which was so hot in Germany at the time.
Yeah, and the fact that if you don't embody this, this God's will to redeem himself, if you don't take that as an obligation, I mean, you're relegated to suffer along with God. You know what I mean? Like, your suffering becomes, eternal in that sense. And so instead of a big bad God sitting on a cloud like an old grandpa, like getting the switch out to whip your ass and throw you into the lake of fire, like that's such like a toddler point of view when you like look at it this way, that hell is actually a frame of mind. Even with out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences, the life review, people don't get the feeling that the other entities, the spiritual beings, are judging them. They explicitly say that they're judging themselves in that respect. So in this way, it's like it's an obligation to be moral, but if you choose to not be moral, then you'll only have yourself to blame, and you'll be the punisher of yourself in the afterlife, essentially.
Well, see, that's really just like theology's way of like getting clever and twisting your arm to be more in alignment with what Steiner is saying is true. Because as badass as that idea is, he's saying like, you really shouldn't have to rely on an external reason. You should come to your own conclusion. So let's, in his own words, he would say,
quote, "They both see man as doing no more than putting into effect or carrying out principles forced upon him by necessity. Naive realism destroys freedom by subjecting man to the authority of a perceptible being, or of one conceived on the analogy of a perceptible being, or eventually to the authority of the abstract inner voice, which it interprets as conscience. The metaphysician, who merely infers the extra-human reality, cannot acknowledge freedom because he sees man as being determined, mechanically or morally, by a being in itself," unquote.
So in most cases, you're either bound by an external authority who knows best, or an absolute power which is responsible for the whole universe, be it
God or the laws of science, physics, operating indifferently everywhere, impossible to appeal to. Everything on that spectrum he conceptualizes as forms of dualism ending in the same result. So he suggests we find rectification within the expansive domain of monism.
Quote, according to the monistic view, then, man's action is partly unfree, partly free. He finds himself to be unfree in the world of percepts, and he realizes within himself the free spirit. Monism does not see, behind man's actions, the purposes of a supreme directorate, foreign to him and determining him according to its will, but rather sees that men, insofar as they realize their intuitive ideas, pursue only their own human ends. Monism, then, in the sphere of true moral action, is a freedom philosophy. Since it is a philosophy of reality, it rejects the metaphysical, unreal restrictions of the free spirit as completely as it accepts the physical and historical, naively real restrictions of the naive man, unquote.
So what does this mean?
Steiner describes this as an unfinished product. We start essentially unfree, bound by the restrictions of the naive man until he
becomes a self-determined man, directed by his own thought and will.
He even says as much.
Quote, monism knows that nature does not send man forth from her arms ready-made as a free spirit, but that she leads him up to a certain stage from which he continues to develop still as an unfree being until he comes to the point where he finds his own self. Unquote.
Thus, the all-important factor here seems to be the awareness and self-direction regardless of your constraints. If you do not choose your actions or even still do not know why you choose your actions, are you really free in expressing them?
Such a good point.
This reminds me also a bit of the devil card in the tarot, where we see that the lovers are bound in their existence. And I just thought that this visual reference fit well with Steiner's description of being unfree in your existence and bound to an externalized authority until you find your own self. And another thing that it reminds me of too is across cultures you have these mythologies and stories about the divine child, and a lot of them the divine child is like hidden away and protected until it can like actually act for itself, once it learns for itself how to act for itself or finds his own self.
Or like say a king dies and the prince inherits the kingdom, but the prince is like 5 years old.
Yeah.
They don't just let a kid rule a kingdom. Like they have to wait till they become a man. Up. Quote, moreover, each individual pursues his own particular ends, for the world of ideas comes to expression not in a community of men, but only in human individuals. What appears as the common goal of a whole group of people is only the result of the separate acts of will of its individual members, and in fact, usually of a few outstanding ones who, as their authorities, are followed by the others. Each one of us has it in him to be a free spirit, just as every rosebud has in it a rose.
Or for the Discordians out there, every golden apple blossom is a potential golden apple.
Hail Eris.
Hail Eris!
So earlier in this chapter, Steiner pointed out that monism will have to recognize that naive realism is partially justified because it recognizes the justification of the world of percepts. So when it comes to our morality, the experience of what is depicted as moral behavior is likely still important, at least in the sense that it gives us the percepts needed to form a personal connection. For without it, we wouldn't have the percepts to form our own relatability to it through intuition.
Meaning, you have to offer a concrete or imagined percept to apply the moral concept to.
For example, often when small children are learning to form a concept of morality, a parent might say, how would you like it if someone did that to you? You know, like if a child hit another kid or stole their toy or something.
Yeah.
This question prompts an internal reflection of how the child might feel if another child stole his toy, and this reflection may land a more intuitive connection to moral action in that given situation. So this does tie in on a deeper level to the golden rule across cultures and across spiritualities. That's the whole do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This act of intuitive reflection is related to morality that spans beyond singular religions or secular ideologies, since it speaks to our intuition.
So you're saying morality requires
empathy and self-reflection?
Yes. And if it doesn't, then you should probably seek external authority until you figure it out. But you have a duty to self-reflect, to basically craft your own moral principles. It has ultimately been the premise of authorities, but without personal intuitive experience, that moral ground is an empty and authoritative law laid with unfreedom. So he goes on to say that,
Quote, whoever is incapable of producing moral ideas through intuition must accept them from others, unquote. Respect my authority.
so this understanding of dualism's role of percepts in free morality lends greater context to the monistic freedom that Steiner is speaking of and how to get there. When Steiner said each one of us has it in him to be a free spirit, just as a rosebud has in it a rose. That's basically what he's saying.
I can't help but think of religion a little bit when this comes up. Like, why is it the golden rule? The golden rule is because you have to stop and reflect. So that seems to use the same word again, reflect the philosophy that Steiner is saying here, that it requires your own sense of conscience and self-reflection and ability to think, to come to a moral conclusion.
Religion is there for people that can't do that. So it's like, explain like I'm 5 morality.
But it's not just religion that has the golden rule. It's not just across religions. It's also across cultures. You'll even find this in cultures that don't have specified religions. That's just part of like a tribal mentality.
It's
and
like
it's
natural
intuitive.
law.
Yeah. It's intuitively natural law.
Like if someone kills somebody's like kid, the natural law would be like they would either be put to death or have their kid killed. Like there's ways that like tribal peoples, like you said, or even just communities of people that have to live together, they just kind of form these laws on their own. It doesn't necessarily have to be a written law or like practice with judges and, you know, that kind of thing.
I can think of a Bible flavored example of this when the 2 supposed moms come to King Solomon and they're like, it's my baby. The other one's like, no, it's my baby. And King Solomon's like, well, we'll just cut the baby in half. The one mom's like, that's fine with me, you know? And then the other one like stops and thinks about it for a minute. Yeah.
He's like, now I know who the mom is, basically.
So if you hear that story and you're like, I guess it's good they cut the baby in half, you're an idiot and incapable of moral thought, I suppose.
And a baby stealer.
But isn't that a good story that like, even if King Solomon himself tells you what to do, it's still on you to self-reflect and decide what the moral action would be. And you know, credit to moms. Credit to moms for knowing intuitively not to cut their kids in half, you know? Not to mansplain or anything. I'm sorry. I'm just passionate.
You're fine.
Maybe he's just autistic and passionately explaining what he's into. I like trains, okay?
And it's for reasons that some people out there would cut the baby in half, that humans kind of have necessitated their own structural laws of society. At least really basic ones, like not murdering.
You flip a few pages, it's like, well, maybe we'll cut the babies in half if they're the wrong babies.
Yo.
I'm saying it's in the Bible, okay? They dash the little ones on the rocks, you know? I didn't write it.
It worked for Sparta.
Look, if God says to do it, you do it, okay? That's the important thing.
It's called eugenics. People have done it.
And if the government tells you to do it, it's morally correct to do it all the time.
Oh, Jesus.
Right?
These are great examples of externalized authority for people who can't come to those conclusions on their own.
Which is important, and why we have monism, which Steiner claims is a freedom philosophy, the only one allowing for true moral action, because ideas, thoughts, and concepts belong only to the domain of humans who do said thinking. Monism rejects moral concepts outside the domain of human life. That makes sense, right?
Quote, human morality, like human knowledge, is conditioned by human nature, and just as beings of a different order will understand knowledge to mean something very different from what it means to us,
those were not just ordinary people there.
So will other beings have a different morality from ours. Morality is for the monist a specifically human quality, and spiritual freedom the human way of being moral. Unquote.
I like the author's notes that he makes in this chapter because he points out how in previous chapters, thinking is a universal principle, and here we find morality to be individually connected through intuition and the utilization of thought for reflection. So the two complement each other as a kind of macro and micro pair in unity, which constitutes spiritual freedom.
So Steiner extends this argument into the domain of purpose, which, if you think about it, tends to run the opposite direction of of cause and effect? Steiner opens the conversation by immediately pointing out that this too is a uniquely human concept through which the detour of human thought is inescapable.
The foresight aspect of purpose is that regardless of the cause which brings one there, the future event is the determining factor of the cause. So Steiner points out that the effect is the driving force of the cause to make the effect happen. The effect determines the cause when it comes to purpose. So the percept of cause and the percept of effect must be connected through corresponding concepts.
Which must be accomplished through thought.
Which means you can't have purpose unless you have human thought.
Which means unless you have humans, there is no purpose.
We are the purpose makers. We do it. It's us.
Quote, the percept of the effect must always follow upon the percept of the cause. If the effect is to have a real influence upon the cause, it can do so only by means of the conceptual factor, unquote.
Meaning that the percept of the effect has no body without the percept of cause. He relates this to the cause of a root and the effect of the blossom, saying that the percept of the blossom does not exist without first having the percept of the root. The human application of this understanding would be like the purposeful planting of a seed to take root in order to grow an apple tree where the eventual blossoms fruit. The concept of the future blossoming apple tree is knowingly connected to the current percept of the sowing of the seed as you plant it. So this is purposeful and shows the roles of percepts and concepts in purpose.
Quote, man makes his tools according to his purposes. The naive realist would have the creator build organisms on the same formula. Only very gradually is this mistaken concept of purpose disappearing from the sciences. In philosophy, even today, it still does a good deal of mischief. Here, people still ask after the extra mundane purpose of the world, the extra human ordering of man's destiny, and consequently also his purpose, and so on. Monism rejects the concept of purpose in every sphere, with the sole exception of human action. It looks for laws of nature, but not for purposes of nature. Purposes of nature are arbitrary assumptions no less than our imperceptible forces. But even purposes of life not set by man himself are unjustified assumptions from the standpoint of monism. Nothing is purposeful except what man has first made so, for purposefulness arises only through the realization of an idea. In a realistic sense, an idea can become effective only in man. Therefore, human life can only have the purpose and the ordering of destiny that man gives it. To the question, what is man's task in life? There can be, for monism, but one answer: the task he sets himself. My mission in the world is not predetermined, but is at every moment the one I chose for myself. I do not set out upon my journey through life with fixed marching orders, unquote.
This, Steiner says, extends to metaphysical ideas in disguise about things like history especially.
There's no inherent purpose to it besides what we make of it. In fact, even God himself is not safe.
The way this is starting to unpack is a bit like an answer to the age-old question, what is the meaning of life? It's a personal affair. This also starts tying into the occult practices of knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. This topic starts to tie several other occult concepts together. So you have freedom, the meaning of life, and true will. Through the holy guardian angel lens, if we follow through into unity with our HDA, we find that not only have we made union with our divine will, but that in doing so, it is a universal divine will, and as such, is in lockstep with the will of God. Many occultists, including Thelemites, have elaborated on this, that in finding and following your true will, it is backed by the universal will. This is like a personal connection to a universal concept, or in Kemetic terms, your Ba is recognized as being a Ba of Ra.
Quote, all such phrases as history is the evolution of mankind towards freedom, or the realization of the moral world order, and so on, are, from a monistic point of view, untenable. For monism, with the rejection of an absolute cosmic being, never experienced but only hypothetically infer, all ground for assuming purposes in the world and in nature also falls away, unquote.
So life and the world is purposeless.
Well, at least according to the viewpoint that Steiner is currently pointing out, until you give it purpose.
It doesn't come pre-packaged. So it's not like an escape room in that sense.
Or a video game. Quote, I construct a machine purposefully if I connect its parts together in a way that is not given in nature. The purposefulness of the arrangement consists in just this, that I embody the working principle of the machine as its idea into the machine itself. The machine becomes thereby an object of perception with the idea corresponding to it. Natural objects are also entities of this kind. Whoever calls a thing purposeful simply because it is formed according to a law may, if he wish, apply the same term to the objects of nature, unquote.
So he points out that we give purpose. We make those connections. Dualism speaks to natural or world purposes, where the absolute cosmic being has realized its purposes. And since monism speaks to the rejection of that cosmic being, all ground for assuming purpose falls away.
You know what this reminds me of? In Apollo 13, if you've ever watched the film, they get into a situation where their CO2 scrubbers get blown up, and they only have the scrap from their spacecraft to create a new one. And they have to create this new CO2 scrubber from objects that were designed for other purposes. So if they couldn't suspend that type of thinking, they never would have saved those astronauts. They had to decide the purpose of these items is to scrub the CO2, and then they could create the object that scrubbed the CO2. I don't know. That's what it reminds me of.
Well, since Steiner is pointing out that with monism, it speaks to the rejection of the cosmic being or the rejection of the authoritative externalized force, if we took that sentiment of Steiner's at face value, it could feel a bit self-defeating or even void of spiritual context, unless we're reminded that all conclusions regarding purpose are only arrived at through thinking. And given how painstakingly Steiner has labored at pointing out that thinking is inherently spiritual, embodied in the individual, I think it would be a mistake to overlook that deeper driving force when we're concluding what it is that he means by purpose. The universal human and the spiritual factors play a harmonious role here, whether it's acknowledged or not. Despite the individual relationship with purpose, it still shares space with a macro purpose of sorts, but we give individualized expression and individual context to it. And he must have also reflected on this at some point, given his commentaries that he added later, which state the following.
Quote, if here the concept of purpose is rejected, even for the spiritual world, lying outside of human action, it is because something is revealed in that world which is higher than the kind of purpose realized in the human kingdom. And when we say that the thought of a purposeful destiny for the human race, modeled on human purposefulness, is erroneous, we mean that the individual gives himself purposes, and that the outcome of the working of mankind as a whole is compounded of these. This outcome is then something higher than its component parts, the purposes of men, unquote.
Heka, what does he mean by that?
Well, that's what I was just pointing out. He's reflecting on it that despite it being an individual purpose, that there's something that's also beyond that.
Yeah, purposes work together and are added up in a compounded manner. You get this superhuman type overarching purpose, authority.
Well, he's like saying that there is, like, I guess the concept of universal purpose when it comes to human purpose, but that the way that we make it our own or interpret it or interact with it is an individual affair. So he's not necessarily saying that it isn't universal or that it isn't spiritual, but he is putting great emphasis on the individual relationship with it and making it our own, because without that, we have no grounds for it. And it ultimately relates to us being unfree if we don't.
So he's arguing more of a bottom-up model of this, whereas most people argue like spiritualism trickles down from an overarching hierarchy.
Yeah. So like when you're doing self-reflection regarding morality or regarding purposes, instead of just solely doing internalizing, look up once in a while to make reference to and see how it plays with others.
Because then you take part in creating the higher form of it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is what I truly believe is at the basis of some of the occult symbolism we've uncovered, specifically in regards to America. Remember, we talked about how Mithras is all through America's symbolism, and we essentially essentially broke it
Yeah.
down to, like, Mithras doesn't symbolize taking orders from a king, right? Mithras does things through friendship, through contract, through mutual benefit. It's a symbol of the very thing we're talking about.
I mean, if you think of what he's saying about like the purposes of men as like a collective egregore, I would like to believe that the drive to be free compared to unfree would be related to the Aeon of Horus. Like that's the direction that we're going in, that people are starting to understand purposeful individual freedoms. And that is largely to this, what you're saying with this kind of Mithras egregore. It's absolutely related. And I think that's the direction, honestly, that we're going. So when you have the collective purposes of men, it kind of seems like that's the new Aeon in a nutshell, is, each one of us doing this.
You know what else reminds me of the rumor I've heard about in Freemasonry, or of Freemasonry, where once you're a Freemason, you don't have to follow the Bible specifically unless you are doing business with others, like in the sphere or domain of doing business. You have to compart yourself with the morality of the Bible. This sounds a lot like that, where it's about the purposes of men. Like, in so much as you're dealing with others, you should act morally, but in terms of what it means to truly be moral, you have to decide for yourself, which is probably why there's so much emphasis on, smoothing out the rough ashlar, which is, if your morality is something you decide for yourself based on your own reflective thought, you would want to purify your own apparatus of thought and reflectivity, right? So you could complete the work.
But I'm not even a Mason. I'm just a crazy rabbit. And if you'd like to hear the more about what the Heka Astra wrote and what the crazy rabbit yelled at her about all week, and Mari Sama's fireworks and AR-15 brand of freedom-loving cinnamon toast for your brain materials, then please visit www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit, where your monthly donation of just $5 will not only get you the extended, uncensored version of this show, you will get access to our entire top secret library of illegal thought episodes in their extended format, which you can binge from and browse from right within Spotify after you log in to Patreon, which is very convenient. And I'll send you a 5x5 high quality vinyl sticker of our Big Bunny Baphomet cover art. You'll get the secret keys to our Discord server as well, where you can hang out with us and watch Demolition Man and play Scrabble whenever we get time to do it. Until then, everybody, thank you, everybody. Eat carrots and shoot lasers.
Pew.